4, get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great. 9, gonna shine, life is good. I'm doing fine. 10, gonna do it right and do it again, yeah. I look into the sky with all the beautiful color, but there's more than just for me, so gonna share it with another. I got to show, to give, let out. I want to sing and shout. Take a look and see a beautiful morning.
Been in here and people are roaring with laughter, so.
It's a dirty showgirl.
Well, it's clean dirt.
You have here the best of the best.
Yes.
So we have many celebrities here. The Holly Madison come over here, and the Usher come over here many often, and the Paris Hilton come here.
Boy, I'm dating myself, but it's okay. Nobody else will. Oh.
That's so Vegas. Welcome back to That's So Vegas. I'm your host, Christine McKellar. This is episode 2. And obviously I was having so much fun with Grant and going over all the luxurious, fabulous glitz and glamour of yesteryear Vegas that I decided to don a boa myself. I'm reclining here in his wonderful home. And we are going to go further into the designers behind the outfits, the choreographers behind the dances, and really what it takes to be a Las Vegas showgirl. I'm just a couple decades too late, but then you know what? That's so Vegas. Here's another fascinating section of this fabulous house of yours, Grant. And with all this talk, and we've looked at some really incredible, of course, you're the mastermind updating these costumes and restoring them, but you wouldn't even have these costumes if it weren't for this gentleman sitting here between us. This is none other than a character or a mannequin of Don Arden. Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, the great thing is that these are actually his clothes. And when his estate had its sale in Palm Springs, we were lucky enough to be able to go there, purchase clothing that he actually wore, purchase his photo albums that are from his childhood all the way through adulthood, showing the transition of his life. We have all these photos that are behind that are from his home, including the trophy that he won in 1974. This is actually very heavy. You should be impressed. In 1974, he won the most spectacular show. See, I wasn't lying. Most spectacular show in Las Vegas, which was Hallelujah Hollywood, and that was at the MGM Grand.
Fabulous.
And we even made sure to put a cigarette in his hand, because that's one thing about Don. You never saw him without a cigarette.
That was back in the day, obviously.
Yes,
I mean, people
definitely
would smoke and drink and dance and dine and do all of that good stuff. And it wasn't even called Sin City then.
No, it wasn't.
No.
And that's a phrase that really upsets a lot of the old-timers. Yeah. They hate when people refer to Vegas as Sin City.
Well, it was a lot of art and beauty, as we can see, and its own culture.
Exactly.
So to speak. What's really, really fascinating about all this, Grant, and you're just such a wealth of information, but really, virtually, and I'm sure all 40,000 pieces in all 4 areas, every single one of these has a story, and you know the story. But we don't have time for every single story, so we're just going to tell little vignettes. This one in particular, though, is pretty interesting, the one about Carol Channing and that necklace. So tell us about the necklace, please.
Well, the cool thing about the necklace that's on here is if you actually physically come here, you'll see 3 of them. And you wonder, well, why in the world did Carol Channing need 3 necklaces? In the movie Thoroughly Modern Millie, they shoot her out of a cannon. Well, they were not going to shoot Carol Channing out of a cannon. So she had 2 stunt doubles, and they had to have the exact same costume as her. Wow. That's why we have 3 of them.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, a visual of Carol Channing being shot out of a cannon, no, that wouldn't work. We're going to move on downstairs now.
Isn't it amazing, though, that she's still alive? I mean, you see all these incredible people pass, and here she is, still alive.
I think laughter's the best medicine.
Yeah, it's
seriously.
Great.
I mean, Bob Hope lived to be 100 and something, and all the greats who just laughed their way through life. So, and not get shot out of cannons. We're going to move on downstairs.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
As a mother, you don't want to have to worry about this bill is coming, but then she needs this chemo. That's a decision you shouldn't have to make.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all, not one bill. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
The treatment doesn't get any better than what you receive at St. Jude. It saved my life. It saved my daughter's life. It saved our family.
Welcome back to That's So Vegas. We're here in the fabulous private home of Grant Philipo, who's just, well, you're so many things. I don't even know what to say. You've produced shows. You're the curator, so to speak, of all this fantastic Las Vegas history. Thank you so much. With the Showgirl costumes. I mean, these are things that are so definitive Vegas and could have been lost, really, in the dust of time, but you painstakingly have restored, and I know that we've looked and viewed some of the costumes that you have upstairs and around, but this is also your private home. This is your residence, and you live among this, and you live comfortably. I mean, we're here sitting in your living room surrounded by all this fantastic glitz and glamour, and I just love it. You've even got a television set, and you throw parties here.
Exactly.
So how long did it take you to, you do have the 4 other locations, but how long did it take you to set this stuff up here in your own home?
Well, the original setup, which this is not, it only took me 1 month from the day the house was purchased until we had the grand opening for our friends and family to come and take a look. But as things have progressed, Mary D., who's one of my partners, Dallas Houston being the other, when Mary D. jumped on board, she was able to make bigger purchases on some things. So the collection expanded quite a bit with her help. And then we ended up, when we got serious about the museum, around, I think it was 2006, we just kept buying more and more mannequins and displaying more and more pieces. So, I always say, most of my friends refer to me as a hoarder.
There was a pause in there, but that's okay, yes.
But, when you have a TV show come and they appraise 100 of the pieces at $15 million.
Right, I saw that.
And you have over 40,000 pieces, you figure that, okay, I'm a hoarder, but, I don't think I'm doing the wrong thing. And, when Mary and I are gone, Dallas will have it, but it's really will end up sooner or later being a gift to Las Vegas, just so that they don't forget what made Vegas, Vegas.
Absolutely. Also, you are looking, though, for a permanent museum structure for most of this. I'm sure you're not going to be able to part with some of these. I don't think I'd be able to if I were you.
Well, the reality is that although we want a 70,000 square foot building for the theater, the school, as well as the collection itself, we'll never be able to display everything that's in the collection. We'll have the majority of it on display, because the one thing I don't want is to be a museum that has an enormous collection that sits in the archives where very few people will ever get to see it. And, we will do like other museums, have one gallery where we will work with other people's collections, so that every maybe 3 to 6 months we will have their collection on display, and then we will switch it out. So it'll always be fresh, it'll always be something new. Some of the classic things like the Vegas shows and the Paris shows, those will be permanent and they will not change, because it's history.
Right.
You can't change the fact that it's history. And, people say, well, there's all these new shows that are happening. They're not history, and they're not in the same,
They're different. They're completely different. I mean, when you look again, and we've discussed like some of the stitching, the hand stitching that goes into costumes that, like Raquel Welch and people that I know a younger generation isn't that impressed. They're more about Britney Spears, like we talked earlier, Jennifer Lopez and things. But that's a whole different presentation too, and that fits in with the modern. We've got cell phones and the immediacy of all that. What you're talking about here is painstaking craftsmanship. And we've talked about Don Arden, a choreographer. We've talked about Bob Mackey, who's designed some of these fantastic costumes for men and women. Back to the museum aspect of it, you mentioned earlier that you want to do some really fun things like interactive to show how the costumes come alive. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the good thing about our collection is that it's not just costumes. We have video, film footage of almost every show that we have costumes from. We have our archives of the programs alone from all over the world are very extensive. We have original costume designs from many of the costumes that we have, and many of the costumes that we have that we don't have the original, we have copies of them. But the great thing is that because a lot of these costumes have so many jewels and beads and sequins, the idea of it being stationary like you see it here in the house is far from what our public venue will be. In the public venue, we'll have entire sets that will revolve. Reason being is that we want the people not only to look at the video and see what it looked like on the actual people that wore it, but we want them to see it in action so that they can see how the costumes play to the light, so that they can see the front and the back of the costumes. Because this costume, for instance, which is a Pete Menifee, is an incredible costume, but it's also incredible from the back. It has an enormous jeweled bow on the back. But where it is here, you can't see that. Where if you come into our public venue, you'll be able to see that. We'll have many of the mannequins coming out of the ceiling. Reason? We want them to be in action. The majority of the mannequins will not be headless. They'll have the heads, they'll have glass eyes, so that when you look at them, and many of them we will have painted to look like the real performers that wore them in the show. We will show an evolution of Showgirl makeup. So people see what the early days of Showgirl makeup was as it developed through the years.
Right, and what they had to go through the process. And like you had said, like the weight of some of these costumes, although the headdresses aren't as heavy as some people would think, because they had to use creative design with the welded stainless steel, things of that nature.
Right.
I mean, there's so much that we could talk about. Just take one particular costume, actually, dissect it, and talk for hours about that.
Exactly.
And that includes the person who wore it. And that would include the designer. That would include the labor.
Right.
It would also include, you know, the choreographer of the show. I think all of those certain elements had to be brought into play, didn't they? I mean, when you're choreographing a show, you have to understand how the costume's going to play into it.
And I think it's really important because there are a lot of choreographers that never take into consideration the costume. They think, well, I'm the director of the show, and in reality, they're probably not the director of the show. But, you know, for me, being a producer, director, designer, it's always been important that when I design a costume, it gets choreographed to fit what they're wearing, not the other way around. And I think it's also important in the museum that people like stagehands and the wardrobe people, all of these people are important. They're what makes these big spectaculars happen.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we'll have our own area where you can go and watch a video and you can click on it and it'll be a stagehand. And they'll tell their story of how did they get involved in these shows.
I think it's
and
wonderful.
What was it like?
You know, I interviewed, just a little aside there, but a funny story. I was in Seattle on a sailboat. And we were doing you go from boat to boat. Cocktail hour, and I met a gal who'd been a seamstress on one of those shows. I can't remember the show, but she has such a funny story about what she would literally between acts have to get down on her hands and knees and sew on the slippers. This stuff is what they did back when these big productions. And she was so afraid that the dancer was going to topple on her. It's just kind of funnier when she told the story. But that fascinated me, that there really are these little backstories, and
there's so
they're
many.
Backstories about big people.
Yeah.
You know, because they all contribute to that. We have to take a break, which is just like crazy. We'll be back, though. I want to talk a little bit more about your projections for the museum, because I know you have some options for children as well. And if we can get that generation, you may skip a generation, but if you perpetuate this, I think it's just a wonderful thing for everybody involved. So a quick shout out to the Red Roof Inn on Paradise. They're across from the Hard Rock Hotel, pet friendly, free Wi-Fi and breakfast, continental breakfast for guests, and they're close to both the airport and the Strip. Do not go away. I'll be back with Grant Philipo and more about the fabulous and legendary glitz and glamour of Las Vegas. We'll see you in just a moment. Well, hey there. Welcome to That's So Vegas. This is our new studio in the famous Las Vegas Arts District, downtown Las Vegas. We're here to rock your world. was going to ask you how it felt to be breaking good here at the Bellagio for the National Center.
What you did.
Your last CD was My Secret Life. I wanted to ask you what your secrets were. Tune in and turn on with us in downtown Las Vegas. This is where the action is, and that's So Vegas. Welcome back to That's So Vegas. I'm your host, Christine McKellar. I'm here in the fabulous home/museum with Grant Philipo. Yeah, I mean, at one point you were actually doing private guided tours here, but then there's been an issue. We won't go into the politics of it. And you're no longer doing that, but you are looking for a home downtown, preferably Las Vegas, where you can bring all of this wonderful stuff, material together. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when we first met with the mayor, Carolyn Goodman told us that, it would make a lot of sense to be in downtown Las Vegas. And she told us to become a nonprofit. So we do have the nonprofit, the Society for the Preservation of Entertainment History, which is a public charity. There's a building called the Reed Whipple. It was a Mormon church built in the 60s. It's the ideal location for us as far as we're concerned. It's in the cultural corridor. And the building, other than the fact that it has dance studios and things that would be a shoe-in for the classes that we'll be teaching, it's a facility that's large enough that we can expand on it and do everything that we want to do there.
So you'd be, again, part of the cool museum concept that you have. You would actually have the dance classes for people who would be curious as to what it would be like to be a dancer, say, from in the era of Jubilee and the Lido de Paris. And
yeah, we'll teach them everything. We'll teach them the process of auditioning, what was necessary. We'll teach classes on costume arts that are dying or have died, so that people will know how to recreate these kinds of things. We'll give classes on restoration of garments so that they'll actually learn how to take something and bring it back to life without totally replacing it with a copy. Every aspect of the entertainment industry that affected me in my life and affected the spectacular shows will be taught there, so that people in the future will be able to recreate these things, recreate new versions of it. A lot of people don't realize that just because Las Vegas, there is no real Showgirl show left, there's a resurgence in Europe right now to where many of the countries like Germany and France, they are trying their damnedest to do these types of shows again, make them as elaborate as they possibly can. And, Vegas kind of killed the spectacular when they started four-walling.
Right.
Because then the producer had to pay for everything. Where in the past, Don Arden's day, Frederick Apcar's day, those people got guaranteed money from the property. They were paid to make these fabulous shows. It's a lot different when you're the producer now, and not only do you have to pay for everything to make the show, but you have to bank that show every single solitary week.
And there's so much going on. I know still, and being a native practically, having lived here since 1980, everybody's still so irritated about now the parking fees and everything.
Oh, I know.
On top of the entertainment tax, and it's almost like really whatever did happen to Vegas, where is Las Vegas gone? We may as well be LA or, Hollywood or just another big city with electronic shows.
Yeah.
And the gambling, we have gambling, of course, but there are casinos all over the place now. So really, what is going to keep Vegas being so special, if not the history?
Exactly.
Seriously, because that's really what this was founded on.
Well, when we started the Las Vegas Showgirl Museum, I believed with the world and how these big spectaculars were all over the world, that there would be another Showgirl Museum. And there are museums that have showgirl costumes, but they do not use their subject matter, the majority of it, as the history of showgirls and the history of showboys and all of that. To find out that we were the only real showgirl museum in the world, for us was fascinating because we saw with all the people from Europe that contact us on Facebook, on our website, that this is a real need. This is something that people are really interested in, and they want to be able to experience all of that. And it's not just the people that were actually performers. It's the general public that never understood this. Our most popular client when we were giving tours were heterosexual men who never stepped on a stage in their life, but they were so fascinated by the fact that these costumes were constructed in the way that they were, to learn that these women, other than the fact that they had to look incredible, they actually did have to have training. They had to go and learn, when the Showgirl evolved, it was amazing because originally Showgirls didn't have to do a lot. They had to look gorgeous, but they didn't have to do a lot. But as time progressed, in the 70s, they came up with the idea of a dancing nude. The dancing nude was a showgirl that danced as hard as a regular dancer in a show. And the only difference was that she was topless in most cases. So we want them to learn about all of it. And, it's just so vitally important to us that if people do want to help us, that we are going to have a benefit probably in November. We're going to have a fundraiser because of the 4 storage units that you've referred to. It's very expensive, and unfortunately, that money comes right out of our pockets.
Plus, even keeping this is a beautiful home, Kenny Care's formerly mansion, but I mean, keeping it as cool as you have to preserve these costumes.
Exactly.
And of course, we had the Liberace Museum a while back. That's no longer there, but Liberace had a hand, didn't he, in you establishing this? There was something in your background where...
Well, when I lived in Las Vegas in 1981, I went and auditioned for Liberace in his home early in the morning, which for Vegas is around noon. And there he was in his bathrobe and all of that, having breakfast, and I sang for him, never knowing that I have the same birthday as him.
Oh.
And he was like, "Oh, you're going to be my next protege." And with the MGM fire happening, I was supposed to go to the Lido in Paris as the lead singer-dancer there. That got squelched because I hadn't signed the contract, and they had to make the contract good for all the people that were in Jubilee, that the show hadn't opened yet. And so I ended up getting a modeling contract in LA, moving to LA, kept in touch with Liberace, ironically ended up meeting these people that had the largest non-union costume shop in LA. And they just happened to also be the house where Michael Travis had created all those incredible things for Liberace for the final 17 and a half years of his life.
That's something.
And the weird thing is even though I was taller than Lee, at that time, all my measurements were the same as his, except for height. And so I got to be his fitting model. So I always say that Liberace got to wear my sloppy seconds because I wore them first.
You know, and I was one of those rare people in the audience when I first moved here in 81, came back in 84. I was the one sitting at the front where he said, "Oh, run your finger or your hand on my leg," because his costume was so beaded and elaborate. And he also had me examine his ring. You know, he did that with every audience.
Yeah.
And that was actually, it turned out later, that was one of his last shows. So I always had a special thing in my heart for that. But, well, all of this has come full circle. You're living in surrounded by ghosts or ghostly memories. Every costume has a story, and it's amazing to me, Grant. You know every story behind every costume. I wish we had more time. We could actually probably do a 5-hour special documentary. But we've had at the bottom of the screen your website, contact information, where people can actually go and cruise the website, look at some of the things that you have, and donate and help.
And make donations.
And make donations, please.
And they all get gifts associated with the donations, so
That's
it's not
wonderful.
just a straight donation.
No, because you know what? That's just so Vegas.
Look how clever you are.
A girl has to be. We have to survive. Thank you so much for welcoming us. Welcoming us? I'll say welcoming us. How's that? Into your home and into this fabulous collection. It's just been nothing but wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
And I will see you at your festivity when you're doing the fundraiser. When is that, the fundraiser?
We don't have the specific date
But
as
in the
of
fall
yet,
sometime.
but it'll probably be in November,
Okay.
and it will be really something for people to see because we'll have many of the burlesque and showgirl legends actually in the show, as well as showboys, so that they can get a real taste of the people that actually did all of this.
It's wonderful.
And see part of the collection.
Physically see it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
physically be a part of it.
Again, they can always go to your website for any updates and further information.
And our
to help.
Facebook page.
And to Facebook. We can't forget.
And both are free.
And both are free. Until next week, I'm Christina Keller with That's So Vegas. See you next week.
1, 2, 3, 4, get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great. 9, gonna shine, life is good. I'm doing fine. 10, gonna do it right and do it again. Yeah.